This is an antique Christmas tree stand that my grandfather and grandmother had in their home. My father inherited it, and then I'm the third generation to own it. It was made in Germany in 1902. There is a socket here where you put the Christmas tree. It stands up this way. And there's a clock mechanism in here, which you wind up with this key. And when you pull this rod up, the tree turns. You see how it's turning very slowly? And while the tree is turning, there's another feature. If you move this lever outward, it plays music. It's playing very fast now because the spring is wound tight. It has two songs. It's doing Silent Night right now, and then it'll change to Oh How Joyfully. I want you to listen to all the tones that are in the tone, all the undertones and little plinky sounds that you don't find in music boxes that they make today. It plays each song twice. At the end of this song, I'm going to turn it off and we'll take the cover off to see the inside. One thing that I'm thinking of my father. He always said, you never disconnect this in the middle of a song. You always wait till the song is past. All right, let's stop it with this lever. Take the key out, and the socket comes off. It's just a tapered shaft and a socket here for the keys, for the tree socket. Now underneath, the reason I want to show you this is the craftsmanship and the workmanship that they did in the old days. 1902, Bob, I'm going to turn this and see if you can get in to read this date. Does that show? Eckardt and 1902. Eckardt is the name of the company that made it.
Mm-hmm. Got it, 1902.
Okay, 1902. So at this point, this is now 2021. This is almost 120 years old. We can see now, I'll put this back, how the clock mechanism works. When you wind this key, you're winding up this big flat spring. And then to turn it on and off, to start the turning mechanism, when you pull this pin up, there's a wire sticking out that touches this shaft. And when the wire is removed from the shaft is allowed to turn and the whole clock mechanism can run. That shaft has this little propeller thing on it, which serves as a governor. And the air resistance of this paddle spinning in the air controls the speed and keeps it going at a steady speed. All the other clock mechanisms, the gears and all, are geared down to turn the shaft and then turn the key. This little pin that comes down, you remember when the cover was on, you could just see the pin. And I remember the story of when I was perhaps 10 years old or so. I was at my grandmother's house. She was showing me this stand. And her story was that there was an angel inside playing a keyboard, playing the music. And when you pushed this staff down, it touched the angel on the head. And she knew that she could stop playing. Again, admiring the craftsmanship. When you think of all of these gears and the clock mechanism, of course, German clock makers were well known, but it's just so beautifully made with the brass and the gears. Now, let's go talking now about the music mechanism. I'm going to start the music again. You can see when we withdraw that handle, this gear is moved in and engages the cylinder. Now, the music cylinder, again, compared to my thumb, and look at the size, it's so tiny, the size of my thumb. And all those little pins turn and pluck the tines of this little comb-shaped. Each one of those comb teeth is another tone. And the tiny little pins that are on the cylinder are spaced and arranged so that they play all the notes in their proper tune. Now think about, how does it do two songs? It has only one cylinder. The cylinder has pins for both songs. And if you look closely again, there's little gaps between the tines of that comb. So one set of pins is striking the teeth. The other set of pins is coming through between the cracks. And you shift from one tone to the other by moving the cylinder just a half a space, one side or the other. The mechanism for turning that cylinder, for moving it, is this little finger. And if you look closely on this gear, I'm gonna let it come around a little bit further. There is a cam in there which has 4 lobes. Here's the cam coming around now. And as you see, when that cam gets down to the little pointer, it'll make a quarter turn. And did you see the cylinder shift? Yeah. That little shift is all it takes to move from one tone to the other. Again, admiring the multiple tones and the little harmonies that are all built into the cylinder. And think of, again, 1902, without computers, how did they get all of those little pins positioned exactly right to play all the tunes in between?
Does your camera see the little tines moving? We should take a...
Now, that's as far as the original equipment, the clock mechanism, the music player. But now think of something else. In 1902, electricity was just barely coming into being, or being used. So trees in those days did not have lights. They only had candles. But still, we've been using this tree with lights. And that's because my father, when he was probably in his 20s, made equipment in here which allows electric current to be passed through into a rotating socket. Otherwise, if this socket is on a tree and you just plugged in a cord, the cord would wind up. So you have to have something which can pass the electricity through into a rotating socket. And that is done by these parts here, which were made by my father by hand.
Wow.
This little black cylinder, you see how it's moving up and down? It's spring-loaded by a little finger spring underneath here. And that carbon rod, my father salvaged from the core of an old D-sized battery. And he got this carbon rod, built it into a wooden frame, so it moves up and down, put a spring underneath, and on the bottom of the socket, he added a copper disc. And from that disc has wiring that goes up to an electric socket, which turns with the socket. Now, when this is touching and turning on the tree, the carbon rod touches the bottom of this and maintains contact while it's rotating. So the electric current gets up to the socket and can feed the string of lights that's on the tree. Something else that I want you to notice about my father. He was only high school education, never had formal training in any of this, but he was a careful man, great attention to detail, and very inventive and clever. First of all, clever to see how he could use a carbon rod and a spring and the copper disc. How did he do all that? He just knew and kept trying till he got it right. But the detail, the rounding off of all these corners underneath, and on this block of wood, rounding those corners. You're making a block that's going to hold a piece of machinery under a cover. No one's ever going to see it. But who would bother rounding off the corners? That's a rare individual who's very attentive to detail. So, can you think of anything else, Karen, that interests you that I should talk about?
Well, I was going to ask you about the paint. Was it always black around the outside like that? Okay.
Yeah, so that when the cover is on, it looks neat.
It looks very
But they didn't paint any further than they had
to.
The cover has all this nice embossing on it, which makes it decorative. Now there are some scratches and mars on it. It's not mint condition anymore because it's been used for 120 years. Here's another little
maker mark.
A little mark from the maker. Again, it says Eckardt, and that logo is probably theirs. Before I put this away, I want to compliment my father on one more item. I'm going to bring the box that he made to carry to store this. My father, again, with no electric tools, just a handsaw and a plane, he made this box with these beautiful tight joints and everything lined up, no sharp edges. He made the cover out of reclaimed lumber. Again, probably because he didn't have money to buy a lot of boards. So you see there's holes in here from a previous use. But he had these individual strips of wood that he glued together. The edges are all carefully rounded off, so it's nice. And again, with attention to detail, putting these nails through. Look at the back side. The back of all these nails is turned over and tapped in. So there's no rough edges. Again, a testimony to his craftsmanship and his determination to do everything right, to leave no corner unturned. So it again makes me think of my father, and also shows where many of us Gieshens have that same trait about attention to detail. About 10 years ago, my wife and I went to a regular theater presentation of a play which was about Christmas trees and German Christmas tree traditions. And in the program, they had a reproduction of this ad from a publication of 1985. It's an ad from that.
No,
1885. I'm sorry, 1885. But you see the name in here again, J.C. Eckardt, which is the company that made the stand. Their town is Stuttgart, Germany. And in the German description, well, look closely at the picture, you can see that that's the same stand that I just showed you in mine. And this is all written in German. I had someone translate it, and it describes the stand with music and decorations. It said it's good for a 50-pound weight, and it turns the tree in slow speed. And it has a mechanism that allows the tree to show festive lights and accompaniment of music. It's good to see that that tree stand was advertised, and we still have one today now that it's 120 years old.
That's awesome.